Hey guys!
And gals!
Today we will have a look at a few ways we can add some spice and variation to our sequences, and the idea for this video came from my Patreons, so thank you Patreons for the idea and also for the support. And already here I have a simple sequence with the ADDR sequencer from Borg Audio. It's sequencing the energy oscillator from the geodesics. It's a really simple 8-step sequence. It sounds like this. It has also some reverb and delay, really simple. And let's have a look at how we can sort of upgrade this sequence with using a sequential switch, and we will use the one from ML, the 8-to-1 sequential switch. And what I will want to do is to add every now and then a random note to the sequence. So let's use sample and hold, and I will use the one from Borg Audio, which will look like this. And in its right click menu we can choose a certain range. So let's go with 0 to positive 3 volts, so we have 3 octaves. We will trigger it with the same clock. I'm using here an LFO as my clock, so we will trigger the sample and hold with the same clock that's triggering the sequencer. And let's send it to one input of the sequential switch. Let's go with input 1, it doesn't matter really. Now let's send our original sequence from the ADDR to all the other inputs of the switch. So we have 7 copies of it. And now this switch has a random input or a random trigger input, so we can drive this sequential switch randomly. And again we will use the same clock, and already we can see that it's running. Again it will switch randomly between the steps. And now this will go to the quantizer. Oh yeah. So now whenever the switch is stepping on step number 1, oh yeah, we have a random note. And already we have some variation in the sequence, and it's not so repetitive but also not too random. What we can also do is use stack. Again, Borg Audio, it will look like this, and send one copy of the sequence first through stack. Let's go with number 7 for example, and then back to the switch. And now for example we can take it an octave up. So now we have one variation of the sequence of the original sequence, an octave higher. Oh yeah. So now sometimes it will play a random note, and sometimes it will play the same sequence but an octave up. And this will happen randomly, of course. And the more variations we use, the greater the chance that they will play also. So now we have just 2 variations, but if you have like 5 variations, there is a greater chance, of course, they will be played. Or they will play. Very nice. So this was the first idea. Let's have a look at another one. Okay, so here I have the Turing machine sequencing 2 oscillators from Mokba modular, and I also have a divided clock locking the sequence. It sounds like this. Oh yeah. Okay, now what I would like to do is to add a bass to all of this, but it should be somewhat connected to the sequence from the Turing machine. So here I have the Voldemar oscillator going through tangents. Nothing special, it sounds like this. A nice bass sound. I'm also modulating the cutoff point with an LFO. Very nice. Now again, I want to have a sequence related to what we already have. So what we can do, we can use sample and hold. I will use the one from count modular, which looks like this, and we will sample the signal coming out of the Turing machine. And again, the sample and hold module will sample this signal only when receiving a trigger. So let's use the same divided clock, the divided by 8 clock, and this will go to the quantizer and from there to the oscillator. Very nice. One more time. And now we have a sequence for our bass, but as you could hear, like this, the pitch goes too high at some points because of the range of the signal coming out of the Turing machine, but there's a really easy way of dealing with this, and we will use a relatively new module from Orange Line. It's called Fence, and it looks like this. And what this module will do, well, among other things, of course, it will make sure that the signal will stay in a certain range and will limit it. So let's send the signal first through Fence to the quantizer. So now we have a range of 1 octave. We can of course change this range. We can go lower, we can go higher, we can change this separately. Let's just initialize it. 1 octave is good for me now. So now we will have the same sequence, but it will not go to the higher registers. And actually, we can get rid now of the sample and hold altogether because Fence has this feature built in. So what we will do, the input that goes to the sample and hold, the signal, will go directly to Fence, and the trigger will trigger Fence. And now we don't need the sample and hold anymore. Very nice. Now it doesn't have to stop there with using this only for a bass voice, but we can also use Fence to add another sequence that will stay in the higher registers. So here we have Plats going through Chronoblob for some delay. So let's use another Fence module, and this time let's set it higher. Let's say something like this, for example. And let's use the second sequence from the Turing machine, again to the input of Fence. Let's also trigger Fence with the Turing machine. Let's go with trigger number 5. And this will also trigger Plats. Very nice. Now this will go to the quantizer, to another channel of the quantizer, and to Plats. And let's have a listen. Oh yeah. Very nice. So now we have another voice that stays only in the higher registers. So you can use Fence to split your sequence into different registers and build a whole composition from only one sequence. Okay, so here we have another sequence, this time coming out of Ions. It's sequencing the wave oscillator from Blamsoft, and it sounds like this. Very nice. And what I want to do is to have this sequence running as a one-shot sequence instead of a looping sequence. So what we can do, we can use a burst module, and we will use the one from Rappelzen, which will look like this. Let me zoom in a bit. Very nice. And instead of having the clock drive the sequencer, the burst module will drive it. So let's send the clock to the clock input of the burst module. so they are nice and in sync. And let's say that we want a 6-step one-shot sequence, so we will send the repetition number to 5, so we have 5 copies of the trigger, send the trigger output to drive the sequencer instead of the clock. Very nice. And now when I trigger burst, we will get a burst of triggers that will drive the sequencer, and only as a one-shot sequence. Oh yeah, one more time. Very nice. Now if you want that the 6-step sequence will play the same notes always from step number 1 of the sequencer, all we have to do is send the end of cycle output to trigger the reset. So let's have a listen to this. One more time. So we have now a 6-step sequence that will start with from step number 1. But I like the fact that the sequence has some variation to it, so let's disconnect this end of cycle trigger. And what we will do, we will send a divided clock to trigger the burst module for us, so the sequence will be triggered with the clock, every clock divided by 12. And this will trigger the burst module. Very nice. We can add some delay to this, of course. Oh yeah. Very nice. Now a nice feature of the burst module from Repelzen is that we have also a CV output that we can use to generate even another sequence, and we can see this also on the scope. We can see this, we have a few modes. This is going up, we have also a mode to go down, also alternating, going up and down. We have a few random modes up to full random. But there's also a random mode that will go just up, above 0, so this is the one that we will go with, this R+. Very nice. Now as you can see, this range is pretty large for 3, almost 4 octaves we have here, so we will attenuate it first. And here I have another voice coming from the FM operator. And of course this signal will go first through a quantizer, so let's send this CV output to the VCA. Oh yeah. We can use also the CV to modulate the FM depth. Oh yeah. And of course we can change this, the sequence by changing the repetition amount or the number of repetitions. If you want, let's say, a 4-step sequence. Or we want a 7-step sequence. We can modulate this also. A very short sequence. Very nice. Okay, let's have a look at another idea. Okay, so the next thing we will do is record a few sequences and then mess with them a bit and create a longer sequence. And for this we will use the phrase sequencer from Impromptu, but it will of course also work with the second version of this sequencer and also with Foundry, so you can choose your weapon of choice. And I have here also the ADDR sequencer, again Borg audio, so we will create a few sequences with it and record them. So let's first of all randomize it. Very nice, drive it with our clock, send it through quantum to the CV input of the phrase sequencer, And now we will need some sort of trigger to trigger the write function of the phrase sequencer, so it will start actually recording. So we will use the trigger output of Quantum to do this, and we will record a sequence, and already here we can see the movement, so the sequence has been recorded. We can disconnect the trigger. Now I also have a voice here coming out of plats, again through some reverb. So let's drive the phrase sequencer with the same clock, and now we will get our sequence. Very nice, so we have an 8-step sequence playing through a 16-step sequence. And of course we can change this, we can change the length of the sequence. If I click here once, we can go, let's say, with 11 steps. Oh yeah. Very nice. Okay, let's record another sequence. So we will move to sequence number 2. Again, let's randomize the ADDR sequencer. Let's go with 7 steps this time. And again, use the triggers to start recording. Very nice, now we can disconnect the triggers. So we have another sequence. Again, we can change its length. So now we have a 7-step sequence recorded into a 16-step sequence. Of course, we can change the length. Let's go this time with 13 steps. Now we can also change its direction. So if I click here twice, we have the run mode. It will go forward or reverse, or ping pong, or pendulum, for example. Let's leave it in pendulum. Very nice. Let's record another sequence. So I'll move to sequence number 3. Again, randomize the ADDR. Let's go with 5 steps this time. Very nice. Again, use the triggers to start the recording. Disconnect. So we have now a 5-step sequence recorded into a 16-step one. We can again change the length. So let's go with something shorter, like a 9-step here. Oh yeah. And now what else we can do? We can change the clock resolution of the phrase sequencer and add ratcheting and such. So let's choose a clock resolution of 12. If you click and hold the length mode button until you can choose the clock resolution, and then go with 12. And now of course we will need to use a clock multiplication to drive the sequencer. So I have here a clock multiplied by 48, which is 4 times 12. So it's the same tempo. And now we can start adding ratcheting. So let's activate the gate type mode, and let's go with the step number 5, for example, and choose this gate mode. Oh yeah. Very nice. Let's go to sequence number 2, and let's go with step number 9, for example, and choose, let's go with this one. Oh yeah. And step, or sequence 1, step, let's say 3, go with this. Oh yeah. Very nice. Now the cool thing about this is that we can chain the sequences and create a longer sequence. So let's change to song mode, and now we can make sure that we have a 4-phrase song. If I click the length once, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 active, so we have 4 phrases, 4 sequences we can choose. So let's chain the sequences. Phrase number 1 will be sequence 1, which is great. Now if I hit spacebar on my keyboard, you can see it moved to phrase number 2, and now all I have to do is hover above this window here, the sequence number window, and click the number of sequence I want, and I want sequence number 2, so I will hit the number 2. And then the next one, again I'm hitting spacebar, it's moving to the next phrase. I want again sequence 1, which is great, and then again a spacebar, and I want sequence 3. So we have 1, 2, 1, 3. Oh yeah. now we got a longer sequence out of recording shorter ones. And there are other things, of course, we can do with each sequence. For example, we can add also probability to the gates per step. So let's go back to sequence mode. Sequence 1, let's choose, for example, step, I don't know, 6, and activate the gate probability for it, and take the probability a bit down, let's say 50%. We can do this for another step. Sequence 2, let's do this for quite a few. 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say. Sequence 3. Let's choose again 2 steps, and I'm just activating the probability that they will play. And again, let's go back to song mode, so the sequences are now chained. Oh yeah. Now there are other things we can do, of course. We can also transpose the sequences, move them around and more. But let's have a look at another idea. Okay, so here we have the Sec3 from VCV with 3 sequences programmed, and our voice is the FM operator going through some delay and reverb. So let's listen to the sequences. This will be the first one, again going through a quantizer. This time I'm using Mother from Orange Line. So this is the first sequence. This is the second one. And this is the third one. Very nice. And what we will do, we will mix those sequences to create a new sequence, and we will also modulate the levels of each sequence to create variations and movement. So let's use the mixer from VCV, which will look like this. This is the mixer. Let's use the 3 sequences, 1, 2, and 3. I will take the master level for now all the way down, just to be careful, to stay on the safe side. Let's send the mix to the quantizer, and now start to open slowly the level, just to see that we are not going too high, because again they are mixed. Let's say something here. So now we have a whole new sequence by mixing those 3 sequences, and now we can change the levels of each sequence and have even another new sequence or variations of this sequence. Oh yeah. Very nice. Now of course, let's just reset this. Of course we can also modulate this through the CV inputs. So let's use sample and hold. Again I will use the one from Bog Audio. Let's just make sure that we have a range of 0 to positive 10 volts. Very nice. Now let's use also a clock divider, and I will use the one from Autodaffe. Let's use the gates from the sequencer. This is our clock actually. And then use a divided by 16 clock to trigger the sample and hold. And let's modulate the levels of 2 channels, let's say the first one and the third one. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So we have some variation and movement, and this can get even more interesting when mixing sequences with different lengths. So here down I have something ready for us. We have 4 ADDR sequencers, and each is set with a different length. So here we have 3 steps, 5 steps, 7 steps, and 4 steps. And they are also being mixed by the same type of quantizer, again going through Mother, a quantizer. The voice we have here is Basil going through Slap. So let's drive the sequencers with the gate output of the Sec3, which is our main clock, let's say. Let's solo this also. So this is Basil now. And I don't even have to modulate, in this case, the levels. because each sequencer has a different amount of steps, so they will meet in different locations or in different times and will add up to a different amount of voltage. So we get a really long sequence. And again, this will be everything together. Very nice, and that's it. Like always, there will be a link in the description to all the patches we looked at today. Feel free to download them and take a closer look. Again, thank you Patreons for the idea and also for your support. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button. If you enjoy what I do, consider becoming also a Patreon. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe and hit the bell. And have a good one.